Thank you, Siva. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me. I get a funny feeling speaking after lunch that everybody is now really well fed and dizzy, and maybe my role is to entertain you while you're slowly drifting away. We've had a few very interesting technical talks in the morning, and I'm following up with a not very technical talk at all. This is more of a conceptual talk, or a talk that is meant to give you some food for thought now that your brain is dozing off, but whatever. We have been, or mankind has been building castles for thousands of years as a defense infrastructure to protect humans, their family, their society, their cities, also their assets, their food, their gold, their future perhaps. Whereas IT security is a relatively new domain. Probably started to think about security in the 1970s or so. 1980s, we made the first movies about it. But it still feels, if you follow this conference, it feels like we're in the dark, trying to make sense of it and trying to get applications and services secure somehow. And there is so much insecurity around. So I thought it was worthwhile to look back in history if this can serve as an inspiration. Maybe they had ideas that could be transferred and applied, or maybe we have IT defense techniques that are actually rooted in history, similar things. So there was a real evolution of successful brick and mortar defense techniques over at least centuries or millennia. While I think the evolution in IT security topics is only just beginning. So we're constantly evolving, we're fast moving, a lot of new ideas pop up and they die because they're not fit enough. It doesn't work. It's too much investment without really a return. So this is meant as a review of a historical evolution to inspire us. But there is a second aspect to it. When you talk about security to non-techies, typically management or even users, you have a hard time explaining technical concepts for them. I guess everybody's familiar with that. You go this and you see they're phasing out. They don't understand what you're talking about, these bits and bytes and hashes and encryption keys and way too complicated. However, when you manage to use a real life, a tangible metaphor, then it suddenly starts to make sense with them. Like, use paper mail as a metaphor for email. Of course, email was built after paper mail, so that really works as a metaphor to explain the mechanism. That's how you can end up receiving an email from somebody you don't know. That's the point. That's how phishing can work via email. I can receive a letter at home from somebody I don't know. It's not authorized. So that metaphor works. And by using a castle, a fortress metaphor, very often we can explain a technical concept to a non-technical audience because it's tangible for them. It clicks immediately. Yes, of course, even if it's a relatively difficult technical problem. And a lot of IT people do this. We build servers like castles. That is often used. But I think when people do this, they're only scratching the surface. They just think of a wall and that's it. A castle is a wall and then you get in and then so. But that's only scratching the surface. When you actually look at the way castles are built, there is a lot more you can make out of this metaphor. And it's a very good illustration how you can build certain things. So my presentation now, before we really get started, is an example how you can use the castle metaphor for several technical concepts that are not so easy to explain to technical audiences. And it's also an illustration and an invitation for you to explore castles and the metaphor a bit, or let yourself inspire. And if that is not enough, then it's at least a few nice photos of places you could visit. Good. So, my name is Christian Folini. I'm an OWASP guy. I'm an OWASP project leader, and I'm specialized in web application firewalls. So I'm a blue team player, and I develop rules to protect online applications. That is a bit tedious work, but it's still good fun. And whatever people say, web application firewalls may be vaporware, they may be made too expensive, but there is an open source alternative that actually has value over the commercial competition. And that is approaching BioZar that I'm running. So the OWASP core rule set project is a really useful web application firewall. I'm also chairing a security conference like the one here. I'm chairing the Swiss Cyberstorm conference in Switzerland, happening once a year. And I've been in the IT security industry for 15 years. In a prior and alternative life, though, I have a PhD in medieval history, so I kind of qualified for my presentation here. And I happen to be a reenactor as well, as you can see on the left. So I actually own a real piece of a real suit of medieval armor, and I used to be president of one of the better-known medieval reenactment companies. As it happens, the company of St. George represents Burgundian artillerymen. So this is like home territory for me now. And of course, if you know about the history, Charles the Bold died when fighting the Swiss. So it's a bit ironic that we portray the army of Charles the Bold. But it's a bit of a home play here for me. So this is what I did before, but I do aside. And this talk brings the two expertise together. I'm going to present you with 3 problems that existed in history in medieval times. Then I'm going to show you 3 solutions that were invented, if you want, in medieval times. And I'm going to talk about 3 useful security practices that you're familiar with, that you're maybe not adhering to enough, or you have a hard time telling your management why it's so smart. They go, yes, we should do this, but new features are way cooler. So these useful security practices become more tangible by using the castle metaphor. Let's dive into it. 3 problems. First problem. Apparently, one vulnerability is enough. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. We know this. A metaphor that medieval people used a lot for the weakest link in a defense is the Trojan Horse. We see here a medieval manuscript from the British Library, and it depicts the Trojan War. Medieval manuscripts would always do drawings or paintings like modern. So the Trojan War doesn't look Greek, it looks medieval. That's very typical for medieval manuscripts, but this is the Trojan War. And you can see a guy entering the horse. I can, based on my experience, tell you that climbing a rope with a full suit of armor is no. Doesn't work. However, if you manage to get in, then actually the Trojan horse metaphor works to show you no matter how strong your defenses are, a single weak spot in your defense, an entry point for the Trojan horse. Being fished, sitting on a scam is enough to destroy everything. That's why we use the Trojan horse very often in IC security, because everybody has this in our cultural background. We know about the Trojan horse, even if we haven't read the Iliad by Homer ourselves. That's why this works. This is a good use of a metaphor. And the medieval people, they use the same metaphor. Next one, a denial of service. This is getting difficult now to explain to a non-technical audience. I mean, a denial of service attack attacks the availability of a service. And what is the availability of a service? Then you start to scratch your head. How do you explain this to somebody? How can you attack the availability? It's really difficult. If you look at it in medieval terms, there were denial of service attacks all over the place. A siege is a classical denial of service attack. In a medieval siege, people would try to interrupt the line of communications, the inflow of water or food, of reinforcements into a city. So the city would come to a halt. It could no longer communicate. You could say the services of the cities were interrupted. So they tried to overwhelm the city with troops. That's what you do in denial of service. You overwhelm the server with too many TCP connections, SYNs, handshakes, HTTP requests, reflected UDP requests, whatever. We see here another manuscript from the British Library, a depiction of the siege of Damascus in 1148. That's the Second Crusade. You have the English king, the French king, and the German emperor, and they're attacking 6 guys on a wall in Damascus. However, the 6 guys are reinforced by 3 guys on the tower equipped with trumpets, and they're not afraid to use them. It is no question here that the defenders won, of course. That the Crusaders broke apart after a few days, and the Second Crusade came to a halt because they failed in successfully DOSing Damascus here. And the manuscript makes the siege probably look more stronger than it actually was. But at least, 3 European kings failing a siege. Very typically in a sense. And what this picture also tells me, when we look at IT security, it's the other way around. It's all these guys trying to defend the service and 6 guys at lapsus exploiting them. That is the core problem of IT security, that we invest so much resources into defending and then it takes a script kiddie to rip us apart. So they, after centuries of building a medieval city, they could defend it with 6 guys. Maybe it's been 15, but definitely more attackers. You would go in a medieval siege, it takes 10 times the number of attackers than defenders to successfully attempt to conquer it. And I get the feeling it's the other way around nowadays. It takes at least 10 times as many defenders to defend against a few script kiddies. So we're nowhere really good. But coming back to the denial of service, in fact, when you think of it in terms of a siege, where you overflow the defensive with so many attackers that defenders are no longer functional, then the denial of service becomes tangible for an audience. Third problem. Your advanced persistent threats, they're a bit falling out of fashions these days because it seems it's still lapsus crowd that wins. So we don't really have to care for APTs as long as we don't defend against the newbies. But to defend against an advanced persistent threat, outside that it's really advanced to do this sort of defense, is you have to threat model for a really strong attacker. So your threat model has to be advanced. If you talk about what is the threat model, then I can point you to the following image. There's an Indian manuscript that rests in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It's a very famous Indian artist called Mishkina, and he wrote a book about Akbar the Great. Akbar the Great is the first Muslim ruler of India. Before the English came to India, Akbar the Great conquered the whole India. And the Akbarnama is his autobiography, here illustrated by famous artist Mishkina. And what you see is horses flying through the air. So Akbar the Great was a big general, very successful general, military leader, and his favorite thing was sieges and attacks on cities. And this happened in the mid-16th century, so very late medieval period, a bit afterwards. And what he would do, he would dig a tunnel underneath the city defense, and then he would blow it up. So the defenders were not prepared for that threat. It's relatively hard to threat model against somebody willing to blow up your city from underneath, to conquer into it. So threat model in medieval times was important, and if you're not planning well ahead, then you fall victim to advanced persistent threats. So that is something we can look back in history and profit from as well. Same problem back in the day as today. Good threat models are really important and should dictate how you build your castle walls. Now, 3 solutions The first one is flexibility. We also speak of agility, or we do DevOps because it is more agile, it's faster, we're more reactive, if you want. Here you have a medieval helmet. That is an original medieval helmet, it's somewhere in Germany in a private collection, and I have a replica of that helmet at home. At times I bring it to presentations to actually get you to touch it, but I had too much luggage. So that's why it's not here. I'm sorry about that. Let me describe this helmet to show you what it can mean to have something evolve for a long, long time until you have a perfectly defense object. Here in structure, it's an object now. So helmets, well, it's fairly obvious. You put something on your head and then if something hits you, it doesn't hurt so much. But how do you build one that actually works? If you've seen medieval movies or museums, perhaps, very early helmets were really clunky. They were very heavy, very large. You couldn't see outside. It was hindering your vision. Your eyesight was really blocked. It's really hard to work with. This one is perfect. Explain you why. We start on the left. It has a long tail. The long tail protects your neck. Very good. Neck is a weak spot in all the defense. On the front, you would have something, a metal thing protecting you. The helmet goes on your back. It also makes the head looking extremely cool. In 15th century reenactment, everybody wants to have a helmet as cool as that. And I would always say no to a fancy helmet like this until I found I need to do this presentation. I kind of need to have such a helmet to demonstrate it. So I have an excuse now to have a cool helmet. Everyone wants to have helmets like that. Then you have a crest around it. It's a wee bit visible. It's reinforced. Because this is, of course, where you're getting hit from the top with a sword or a mace. It hits the crest first. So there it has to be double strong. If you make the entire helmet super strong, then it's too heavy, and then you get a headache, or you walk around like that. So you reinforce the exposed spots, and the rest is still bearable. Goes down in front. You have an eye slit. Very narrow. It's wide, but it's very narrow. So you don't see your own feet. You need to see your own feet? No, actually no. That helmet is optimized for a horizontal wide view. When is a horizontal wide view vital? When sitting on a horse with a lance. This is a jousting helmet, or primary use as a jousting helmet. You see exactly enemy knights on their horses. You don't see their feet. You're not interested in their feet. You want to see them approach. And it goes very wide. So this is an optimal use. It gives you exactly the information that is vital for you while protecting the rest of your face. The front visor around your face is reinforced again. It's the strongest piece of the helmet here in front. This is where it's strongest. It is a wee bit curved, meaning when the lance hits you, it doesn't slide into your face or into your eyes. The lance would actually slide away on the side or go down. But it's not hitting your gorge or your eyes. It's on the side. So it's tiny details that make this really strong. And then as you can see, you can lift the visor up. We're going to see this in a second. So what I want to say with this is they really tweaked with this. They didn't download something for GitHub or copy it from Stack Overflow. We're done. We're secure now. No, they tweaked with this for several centuries until they had the best working helmet there was. That helmet only became a problem when fire guns appeared. New threat model. That's when armor disappears because guns shoot through helmets. But that was a new problem, new threat model. But up till the 16th century, that was the perfect helmet as far as evolution went. That's the best helmet you can get historically. Now, I told you can lift the visor. On the left, you see late friend Tommy Hellman from Sweden and his friend Stefan Hansson. Tommy has the similar type of helmet, visor up. Look at his eyes. The helmet closes down on the eyes, and then it goes up to the edge of the eyes. When you wear the helmet like this with the visor up, you have perfect vision. You don't see the helmet. So the helmet no longer impedes with your vision at all. If you want protection from the front, down with the visor. But usually you wear it up, unless you have cavalry attacking you. So the helmet is perfect in two modes. It's good when jousting, perfect when jousting, but it's also perfect when doing infantry, when fighting with guys where you need to see their feet. So it has a dual use, so to say. It's agile, it's flexible. Depending on your situation, you can reuse the same thing. You don't need two helmets. This is a really agile, flexible tool. Then on the right, you see a third mode. Stefan has it halfway down. So it's a bit like my head, where you get some protection of coming downwards to your face. This is the bow and arrow situation. They shoot in volleys, like this. You lower the helmet, your face is protected. You still see in front. You can all over see the sun, but you don't care so much. But you're protected against incoming arrows. So the same helmet is very flexible. It interferes as little as possible with your vision, and it allows maximum protection. So this is a highly optimized defense tool. And this is what we should be striving for. I think it's this level of protection that helps when doing IT defense. You want to have defense tools that are as flexible and as strong and as protective and as refined as this. Next one. Defense in depth. We think of castle as a wall of bricks, people inside, attackers outside. But that is absolutely not the case. In a real castle setting, you have multiple layers of defense. You have a layered defense or securing layers. These are all terms we use in IT security. And people see only servers when they're not techies, and they've heard of firewalls and servers, but they don't see how that layered defense would translate for real. And then you can make good use of the castle metaphor by showing them castles. This is a ridiculously layered Austrian castle. Show you photos from all around the castle. This is from the east. The east is basically a mountain. I mean, climbing up here again in armor is really difficult. You don't want to do this. So you take the other way. Here on the right, you see the road going up in circles to the castles. I've counted it's 15 gates. But this is crazy. This is also about representation and showing I can build 15 security gates in my defense structure. It's probably not what you're doing in IT security. But this is a show-off castle. And it was never conquered, by the way. I'm not surprised. Here you see them in a top-down view. It's 15 of these gates. So that's always a gate. In historical reality, they would, when they become under attack, they would take out all the trees. Perfect line of vision. Also meaning the attacker has nowhere to hide. You make the first 5 gates, yes, but you don't have anywhere to hide. You're in plain sight, we're shooting down on you, and while you cannot shoot up on us because we're behind the wall. So this looks not as good as it was in historical times when it was under attack. This now is a Swiss castle. Same situation here with water involved. When I did this talk first time in Austria, I realized Austria has a serious lack of moats. At least we have a few ones in Switzerland, and you have a lot of ones in the Netherlands and in Belgium. A lot of moats around. More water, probably. The water is very interesting as a defense means, but it demands different techniques from the attacker. Translate this to modern server infrastructure. When I want to attack this castle, I maybe want to have a ladder to go over the wall. However, the ladder has to be placed in the water or on a boat. Placing a ladder on a boat, don't do this, doesn't work. You end up in the moat. So by combining two defense techniques, they make it extremely hard on the attacker. Either the attacker is filling up the moat with a lot of material, taking a lot of time, or they find a way somehow over the moat. And of course, you would take the bridges away. So a combination of defense techniques filters out attacks very successfully. And of course, that translates to IT security as well. I can build 5 firewalls behind each other. I mean, if you manage the first one, you probably manage the second and third one as well. But if you do this on different protocols with different techniques, if you're adding, for example, a sandbox where you try out payloads or file uploads first, then they not only have to pass the authentication step, but afterwards they also can have to be made executable without being detected. It gets way harder for the attacker by combining different defense techniques. That's what the guys did here. If you count, I mean, this is one island, then a new mode, and then the second island. So either they come in here until the main island, or they go straight for the main island, but the wall is like 8-9 meters high. And then what is not so big anymore is this tower in front, in the center that collapsed during the centuries, or they used the bricks or the stones for something else. Historically, you would do all these walls, and then you're outside this wall, and there is no entrance in the ground floor. So you have to go up like 8-10 meters to get into the tower. And inside, no stairs, of course. So historically, they do one layer of defense after the other on a relatively small surface. I mean, that's a tiny island. I mean, that thing is not 100 meters. It's maybe 80 meters long, this whole thing. Next one, this is one of the most famous Swiss castles in Lake Geneva. This is Chillon. If you ever get to Switzerland, this is the castle you want to look at, by the way. And this one is just, looking from this perspective, is just a collection of walls. It has 5 security sectors in it. As an attacker, you would have to fight your way through 5 gates. And the moat, or the lake around it, apparently. So this combination of water and wall is really useful historically, and it's of course very useful in the modern time as well on IT security, and it's easy to explain to management why you don't need necessarily so many firewalls. You also need other defense techniques, because the combination is what makes layered defense so effective. Next solution. We used to talk of whitelisting. That is not so fashionable anymore. We now talk of allow lists or positive security. Least privilege principle or positive input validation goes into this, but you can also count zero trust in this, or a reduction of the attack surface. I think it's relatively, you can explain zero trust to management, but the least privilege principle, it's getting hairy a bit. And also whitelisting, what you mean exactly, it becomes extremely clear when you look at Aeroslits. What is an Aeroslit historically? An Aeroslit is a hole in the wall. It's a hole in the wall where the defender can look outside, but the attacker cannot really get inside. I mean, it's too small to creep through it. You can shoot inside, but you need to hit the small hole. The defender is right behind the hole. For the defender, it's easy to hit, pound the gun out, or the crossbow, or the arrow. But for the attacker, who's maybe 50 or 100 meters away, it's a relatively small target. And you don't see whether there is somebody behind it or not. So for the attacker, it's very hard, and for the defender, it's really cool. Now, turn this around to a modern network firewall. A network firewall is usually configured in a way where all the ports are closed, and then you open clear text and encrypted HTTP, typically. Wall, 2 holes. The attacker, if he or she wants to attack you, they have to use these ports. I mean, you can try out the SMTP port, you can try out all the Samba stuff you want. SMB, it's not going to work because you break on the wall. The attack surface greatly reduced. This is so effective. It's so simple. Build a wall, 2 holes in it, you're done. Conceptually, a narrow slit or a positive security model forces the work on the attacker. The other way around would be a shield. A shield is like this. Attack coming there. I go, oh, attack coming here. I constantly have to turn and anything. I have to work. And I'm never really protected. With a wall, with a narrow slit, it's completely different around. Happening back there, I don't care. I have a wall. Happening over there, I have a wall. The only thing I care about is these 2 holes. And they're relatively small to it. I can defend here. So it's harder to build than a shield, obviously, but it gives very good protection. And it forces the attacker to hit the holes. So the attacker has to prove me that he's able to hit these relatively tiny holes in the wall. If he or she is not able to hit them, then I don't care. Shoot with a gun on this, hit the hole, or the bullet drops down. This is extremely effective, and this is why allow lists are so effective. If I'm only allowing 3 accounts on a server, then I don't have to be afraid of all the other accounts anymore. I have an allow list. It's acceptable. If I have an API and I only allow a set of 10 API calls, then I don't care anymore for all the idiotic rest that is scanning the internet, because these are the only requests I'm willing to accept, combined with the HTTP method, and I'm done. That is so easy to defend that. Let's look at a few other arrow slits. That is the same one from inside. You see the defender gets a bit of angle, so he can shoot a bit wider. This one is the castle with the ridiculous amount of gates you've seen before. What they have downward facing arrow slits. How do you do a download facing arrow slit? That is, the attacker is in front of the gate. You sit on the floor, you take a hand grenade and throw it out. It drops amongst them. And they have no chance. They don't even see you. So you just have them explode in front of your gate by throwing something down on them. Extremely effective. 15 times behind each other. If somebody survives, he has a very hard day. This is a modern version, somewhere in Tyrolia. You can do very fancy style, very fancy forms of arrow slits if you want. This is the Tower of London. Imagine this is a network firewall and every brick is a port. The Tower of London is an illustration of a network firewall. Every brick is a port. Most of the ports are closed and a few ones are open. It's very simple to explain what a closing ports actually means when you use a castle metaphor. Good. I'm now going to enforce a few known security practices with images of medieval castles. Look at this one, for example. You remember the Equifax hack a couple of years ago, where all the North Americans lost their credit card score in an attack, where the multi-billion company Equifax blamed the hack on a system administrator who hadn't patched the server. But that is not the whole picture here, because they hadn't patched their servers for several centuries, apparently. So the mode had become extremely dysfunctional here. I mean, you can blame it on the lack of water, on the drought, but explain this to the press after everybody has lost their credit card score. So the access layer is completely disrupted for lack of patching, and even the inner application servers show first sign of disruption, and under a siege, it wouldn't take 10 times the attackers to kill this castle anymore. They would be conquered in seconds. And that was happened to Equifax because they didn't patch their server. And if management tells you, we don't really have the resources, or a customer tells you, we don't really have the resources to patch our servers, showing them pictures like that is, this is what your bank looks like. Is this how you protect the customer's money? It's a very good illustration what a lack of security patches actually means. Next one, the SBOM. The software bill of materials is a detailed inventory of your assets. You can only defend what you know. You can only patch or update what you know. If you don't know you have a server, then chances are the server is not secured. That's why we need Sbombs, and they're now being developed, filled, implemented. Projects are running now, because namely after the Log4j disaster, people realized it probably makes sense to have a list of the application that use the Log4j library. And of course, historically, they had the same problems. This is a role, an inventory role. You can see it on the bottom. You roll this up. This is not a book. This is a long roll. And then when you buy stuff, you add it at the end. And it has little notes where they replaced things. Like, this farm is no longer in our possession. It belongs now to somebody else, so you strike it through. Or, by the way, this farm added a new field added to the roll. That belonged to the Habsburg. That's the guys that became emperors of Germany, Austria afterwards. They actually come from Switzerland. This is a Swiss inventory. Why did they have to do that? Because they wanted to retain all their land, their farms. And if they didn't know a farm, then the farmer wouldn't pay tax anymore. And maybe after 20 years, he would simply live happily without a knight above him. So they keep meticulous lists, of course, so they wouldn't lose it. It makes perfect sense. Here we see a network diagram of the city of Cairo by the Ottoman general Piri Reis. He was very famous for his maps of the cities he conquered. And he would design these maps for military use. If you're not able to draw your infrastructure, then it's hard to share a conceptual view of how to defend against it. That is a tool, a drawing of your infrastructure. Either it's hardware or conceptual, at least a logical overview, is a tool where you can talk about the threat model afterwards. And that's why he drew these maps of these cities. So you would know, we don't expect attacks coming over from the pyramids of Gizeh, but here from these hills probably dangerous. Let's reinforce the city in this direction. That's why he would draw these maps. These are really important. And it makes total sense in the military setup, but I hear customers say, we have this in the config files, we don't really need this, or our people know this. Then, are you sure? Are you talking of the same servers without seeing them on a paper? I think it is important to invest resources in having these tools, and maps are a tool. Final one. Detailed view of this Cairo map. Final one. Bug bounty programs. Switzerland has been extremely slow with adopting bug bounties. Right before the pandemic, we ran the Swiss Cyberstorm conference where we said the motto is now embracing the hackers, because we now think maybe we can start to convince people that bug bounties are a good thing. And now during the pandemic, it popped up all over the place in Switzerland. This is now very active. We have the big players entering, a few local players popping up. This is a very active scene now. And I hear it's relatively similar in Benelux. It took a long time. People actually started to embrace the concept of inviting attackers to your site. Because Switzerland, of course, people go, no, we don't want them to attack us, but we're secure, trust us. And convincing them you cannot really be secure without testing your defenses. It's a futile exercise to declare that you're secure if you haven't really tested it. And yes, you do pen tests, but the pen testers are the nice people. You want the nasty ones with the nasty attacks to come. And it's only after you do these exercises, whether it's red teaming or advanced penetration tests or really bug bounties, that these guys know whether the gate is secure or not. Actually, I'm not sure if this is a red team exercise or they're going for the real thing. Definitely the stones look to be heavy. So it could also be that this is not only a realistic attack, that it actually is an attack. So I'm not ruling this out. However, I'm pretty sure that the young bug bounty hunter here in the catapult is doing a very exotic attack. chances are he's not going to survive this. But if he is, and if he actually lands within the castle successfully, then I think he's worthy of a very big prize, a big bounty. And it's this sort of crazy attacks that makes a bug bounty a worthwhile endeavor, because these guys are trying out things, and the young ladies are trying out things that the paid penetration testers wouldn't do, because they're not paid for doing crazy stuff. They have to do realistic stuff. And bug bounty hunters tend to dig into things that look very crazy at first, but they suddenly succeed. That's why I think they discover things that 5 penetration testers have not discovered beforehand. Again, bug bounty hunting looks a bit weary, but if you look at it from a historical perspective and you show this is a bug bounty hunter, and you don't know what happens, but maybe he succeeds and then he's the hero, helps to explain the concept to a modern, non-technical audience. Let me sum this up. I think the problem that a brick missing in the wall, or a Trojan horse, or a little weakness in the defense is enough to disrupt your successful defense is a historical problem that we share today. A single non-patched server can be the entry point to your crown jewels. Denial of service attacks were as widespread back in the day as they are today, and if ransomware ever disappears, maybe we're going to see more denial of service attacks against. And the APTs and hard to plan for threat models are a historic problem, and they're a modern problem as well. Flexibility in your defense is important. You want to have a defense in depth over several layers. You want to do allow lists if you can, because they're so powerful. They're so important, like Aeroslits. Super effective. Please tell your customers and your boss that you need the time to really patch your servers, or you look like Castelpioz in Guadalajara in Spain. You want to have a software bill of materials. And bug bounty programs are kind of cool. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Christian. Any questions or other ideas for Sema, or metaphors or castles that you have in mind? All right. Thank you very much. I don't think we fell asleep. It was very interesting.